The priest's voice cracked through the soft murmur of prayers like a thunderclap tearing the sky in half. The cemetery froze. The sound of shovels, footsteps, and whispers all stopped at once. He stood there, his face pale under the gray clouds, his trembling hand clutching the worn leather Bible against his chest. Then he said the words that would rip the ground beneath my feet. "She asked me for a favor before she died," he whispered, his eyes never leaving mine. "And I can't fulfill it. Not while this lie lives inside her daughter." For a heartbeat, no one moved. No one breathed. The air felt too heavy to exist in. I could feel every stare slicing through me like blades. Neighbors, old friends, the women from my mother's church, even the children clutching their mother's skirts. All of them looking at me as if I were a stranger at my own mother's funeral. My name hung unspoken in the air, but everyone knew who he meant. Me, the daughter. The one standing beside the coffin, my hands gripping a bouquet of white lilies that suddenly felt like they were made of glass. The petals trembled between my fingers. My mouth went dry. I wanted to speak, to ask what he was talking about, but my throat was a locked door. All I could do was stare at him, frozen, while the rain began to fall in thin, hesitant drops, dotting the polished wood of my mother's casket. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I had come to say goodbye, to let her rest in peace after months of watching her fade away in that small hospital room. I'd promised her I would make sure she had a proper burial, that everyone she loved would be there, and they were. But as I looked around, I could see how quickly love could turn into suspicion. The same neighbors who used to wave from their porches now avoided my eyes. I could almost hear their thoughts whispering louder than the rain. What lie? What secret? What did she do? The priest's voice trembled again, softer now, but every word was a knife. "Lucia," he said finally, my name breaking through the thick silence. "You know what I'm talking about." I shook my head without even realizing it, my lips parting, but no sound coming out. My body moved on instinct, one step back, then another, until I felt the cold stone of a headstone press against my spine. I wanted to disappear, to vanish into the earth where my mother now lay. I had always thought Father Miguel loved my mother like a daughter. He had visited her every week when she was sick, bringing her communion, holding her hand when she was too weak to pray. The night she died, he was the one who called me, his voice calm and steady, telling me she had gone peacefully. I trusted him. I trusted him enough to let him lead her funeral. And now, standing there in front of everyone, he was tearing apart the last shred of peace I had left. "Father, please," I finally managed to whisper. "Please stop." My voice cracked, thin and desperate, but he didn't. He looked at me with eyes that carried both pity and pain, as if he didn't want to say it but couldn't keep it inside any longer. "Your mother made me promise to tell the truth," he said, almost in a whisper, "but only when you were ready to hear it. And now," he paused, his gaze softening, "now she's gone, and you must face what's been hidden too long." A low murmur spread among the crowd like wind through dry grass. I could feel people shifting behind me, their whispers growing like a living thing. "What does he mean? She was such a good woman." "You think the daughter did something? Maybe it's about the father?" The voices tangled and twisted until they were one long hiss of judgment. I felt my stomach twist in knots, the nausea rising to my throat. I wanted to scream that I didn't know anything, that I wasn't lying, that I had no idea what he was talking about, but the words wouldn't come, because deep inside me, buried in a place I had tried so hard to forget, something told me this moment had been waiting for years. The clouds broke open then, rain falling harder, soaking my hair, my dress, the damp earth under my mother's grave. The priest closed his Bible slowly and lowered his head. He didn't continue the ceremony. He just stood there, silent, as if praying for forgiveness. For me, for her, for whatever truth was about to surface. And I couldn't move. I could hear my aunt's voice somewhere behind me, calling my name, but it sounded far away, muffled by the roar of rain and the pounding of my heart. I wanted to run, to hide, but every direction was filled with faces I knew since childhood, faces that now looked at me as if I were poison. My knees buckled, and I dropped the flowers onto the wet ground. They landed beside the coffin, the white petals sticking to the mud like pieces of a broken promise. The priest finally turned to the coffin, made the sign of the cross, and whispered something I couldn't hear. Then he looked at me again, his lips trembling. "The truth always finds its way, Lucia," he said, "even when buried deep." Then he turned his back and walked away, his black robe whipping in the wind. For a long moment, nobody said a word. The only sound was the rain drumming on the wooden lid of the coffin. Then someone coughed, another person muttered a prayer, and slowly, one by one, the people began to leave. They didn't come to comfort me. They didn't offer hugs or condolences. They just walked away, as if I were the disease that had killed her, as if I had done something unforgivable. When I finally looked down at her name carved into the stone, Helena dos Santos, 1958-2023, the letters blurred behind my tears. I whispered, "What did you do, Mai? What did you make him promise?" My voice was barely a breath, swallowed by the rain. There was no answer, just the hollow echo of my own heartbeat. I stayed there long after everyone left, my shoes sinking into the mud, my fingers tracing her name on the stone. I remembered her hands, frail and trembling, clutching mine in those final hours. "Lucia," she'd said weakly, "promise me you'll forgive me someday." I thought she meant for dying, for leaving me alone. But now, her words felt like a puzzle piece finally snapping into place, and the picture it formed terrified me. The priest's words wouldn't stop echoing in my mind. This lie lives inside her daughter, inside me. What lie? What truth had I been carrying without knowing? My mind raced through every memory, every unanswered question, every strange moment from my childhood that I had pushed away. My mother's trembling whenever I asked about my father, the way she changed the subject when people mentioned the man who used to live with us, the way she'd cry at night, alone, thinking I was asleep. I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering. For the first time in my life, I felt like I didn't know who I was. Not really. A gust of wind blew through the trees, scattering leaves across the graves. I closed my eyes, letting the rain wash over my face, and I whispered, "If you wanted me to know, then tell me, Mai. Please, tell me." But there was only silence. When I finally left the cemetery, the streetlights had begun to flicker on, casting pale halos over the wet pavement. I walked slowly, barefoot now, my shoes ruined by the mud. People passing by glanced at me, then quickly looked away. Maybe they had been there. Maybe they had already started spreading the story. In a town as small as ours, it would take less than a day for the gossip to reach every corner, every doorstep, every whispering mouth. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window of my mother's old house, the house that smelled like soap, prayer candles, and secrets, and watched the rain slide down the glass. Her picture stood on the table, framed by flickering candlelight. I stared at it for hours, trying to see something in her eyes that could explain all of this. A clue, a confession, anything. But her smile was the same soft, tired smile I had always known. The smile of a woman who carried a storm inside her chest and never let it show. By midnight, I found myself whispering again, this time to the darkness. "What did you want him to tell me? What did you think would save me?" My voice broke. Because now, mine, all it did was destroy me. I know many of you watching this might not believe how something like this could happen in real life, how a funeral could turn into an open wound. But it did. And if you've ever felt that the truth about your family was darker than anyone dared to say, you know exactly what that moment feels like. That silence, that fear, that sense that everything you thought you knew about love and loyalty can crumble with just a few words. Tell me in the comments if you've ever faced something like this, when truth and betrayal collided in a way that left you breathless. You can even write it simply. I know how that silence feels. Your words might help someone else who's still standing in that rain, waiting for answers that never come. My name is Lucia Helena dos Santos, and for most of my life, I thought I understood who I was. Or at least, I convinced myself that what I knew was enough. That the empty spaces in my story were simply parts of life everyone had. Gaps, blurred memories, lost names. I never asked too many questions. I learned early on that questions made my mother cry. And when someone you love cries every time you dig into the past, eventually, you stop digging. You build a fence around the silence and tell yourself it's protection. But now, after that day at the cemetery, after the priest's voice sliced through my world, I knew there was something buried much deeper than grief, something alive, something that had been kept from me, not to protect me, but to control me. I live in a quiet, almost forgotten corner of Georgia, a town with one gas station, one post office, and a diner where I've spent the last 11 years refilling coffee cups and pretending I'm okay. That diner, Cheryl's, is the kind of place where the same 6 people sit at the counter every morning, where the jukebox still plays Patsy Cline and the bell above the door is louder than the conversations inside. It's the kind of place where routine becomes a religion, and I clung to that routine like a life raft. I got up every day at 5:30 a.m., tied my apron, and smiled at people who never asked much, and I never offered more. My world was small, and I liked it that way. Or at least I thought I did, until everything shattered. In the weeks leading up to my mother's death, I started noticing little things I'd ignored before. Her hands trembling more than usual, the way she stared at me when she thought I wasn't looking, like she wanted to say something but couldn't, or wouldn't. At night, when I changed her IV or helped her to the bathroom, she would sometimes grab my wrist and just hold it there. No words, just pressure, as if to say, I'm still here. There's still something I need you to know. But she never said it. People in town knew my mother as Elena, a church woman, the kind who baked for every funeral, led rosaries, and kept her yard immaculate. She was quiet, deeply private, the kind of woman who never raised her voice, but whose silence could fill a room. And I was her only daughter, her only family. That's what everyone believed, what I believed. Growing up, I never met my father. My mother always said he died in an accident when I was a baby, that he was a good man, taken too soon. She showed me one photo of him, just one, a blurry picture of a man standing next to a car, smiling toward the sun. No name on the back. No stories to go with it. Just, that's him, your father. And that was enough for a while. But the truth? It never felt right. Even as a kid, I could sense the weight behind her eyes every time I asked about him. The way she shut down like a door slammed in a storm. So I stopped asking. I learned to fill in the blanks myself. I created a father in my head. Kind, strong, maybe even a little reckless. I imagined he would have taught me to ride a bike, walked me to school, called me kiddo in that easy, affectionate way fathers do in movies. I built him out of smoke and wishes because that was all I had. And when my friends asked about him, I smiled and repeated the same line. He died when I was a baby. I don't remember him. And they'd nod, say sorry, and move on. No one ever pressed. And that was fine with me. My childhood was strange, but I didn't realize that until much later. I thought everyone lived like we did, just me, my mother, and the man who wasn't really anything but always there. She called him Tio, uncle, but I don't remember ever being told how we were related. He wasn't warm. He didn't play games with me or take me for ice cream. He was quiet, always watching, always sitting too close, but never saying much. His presence was like smoke, hard to grasp but impossible to ignore. Some nights I would wake up and hear low voices in the kitchen. My mother, whispering, crying. Him, murmuring something I couldn't make out. Once I crept down the hallway and peeked around the corner. She was sitting at the table, her head in her hands. He was standing over her, one hand on her shoulder. I don't know why, but the sight made me nauseous. I ran back to my room and hid under the covers. When I asked her the next day what happened, she said she was just tired. Being a mother is hard, she told me. You'll understand one day. I never saw her with anyone else. No friends, no dates, no other men, just him, always him. Sometimes gone for weeks, but always returning. And when he did, the air in the house changed. Colder, stiffer. I don't remember any specific moment that stands out. No dramatic event, no clear sign of danger. But there was always this unease, like something was always about to go wrong. By the time I was a teenager, I had learned to make myself small, quiet. I got good grades, never got into trouble, and spent most of my time at the library or at church. My mother approved. The less attention I drew to myself, the happier she seemed. I thought I was being a good daughter. I didn't know I was being controlled. When I turned 18, I moved out briefly, just 2 towns over, to a tiny apartment above a laundromat, but I came back less than a year later. My mother got sick for the first time then, and I felt guilty for leaving. I told myself she needed me, that I had to be there for her, that it was the right thing to do, and maybe it was. But deep down, I wonder now if it wasn't just fear. Fear of being alone with my thoughts, of what I might uncover if I finally stepped away. After the funeral, after the priest dropped that bomb and walked away, I returned to that same house. The house where every wall held a memory, but none of them made sense anymore. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching the furniture, opening drawers, searching for what? Answers? Closure? Or maybe just a piece of myself that still made sense. Her bedroom was untouched. The same quilt on the bed, the same rosary on the nightstand. But something was different. Or maybe I was. I sat on her bed for hours that night, just staring at the ceiling, waiting for her voice in my head to tell me what to do. But all I heard was that priest's voice. This lie lives inside her daughter. I kept thinking, what lie? What truth had been buried so deeply it could make a priest stop a funeral? What was I supposed to carry, unknowingly, all these years? I know a lot of people might think this sounds too dramatic, but trauma is dramatic. It doesn't arrive politely. It crashes into you with no warning, no manual, no way out but through. And when it comes wrapped in family, in love, in the people you trusted most, it cuts deeper than anything else ever could. If you've ever had a parent hide something from you, something huge, something that changes everything, please tell me I'm not alone. Share it in the comments. Even just write, I know the weight of hidden truths. Because I swear, sometimes the only thing that keeps us going is knowing we're not the only ones standing in the middle of the storm. I remember being 7 years old, standing barefoot on the cold linoleum floor of our kitchen, the morning sun creeping in through the half-closed blinds, and hearing my mother's voice drop to a whisper when he entered the room. That silence, sharp, uncomfortable, was my first lesson in obedience. When he came in, we stopped laughing. We stopped asking. We stopped existing the way children should. That man, who I was told to call Tio, wasn't my uncle by blood, or at least no one ever explained it. He was just there, like a shadow that never left, a presence too heavy for any room. He was tall and always wore the same worn-out boots that thudded against the floor, letting me know he was near before I could see him. His belt was thick, scratched, stained, an object I feared without ever being told why. I learned his moods the way some kids learn lullabies. I could tell what kind of day it would be by the way he chewed his food or the sound of his steps in the hallway. If his boots dragged, it meant he was tired and maybe safer. But if they were quick, loud, like they had somewhere to be, somewhere to take that tension burning under his skin, that's when I would slip away, find a quiet corner, make myself invisible. My mother never told me to fear him. She never had to. Children can read the language of fear long before they can spell it, and my mother's body spoke it fluently. She never smiled when he was around. Her eyes didn't sparkle like they did when we were alone, baking or planting flowers in the backyard. When it was just us, she was soft. But when he came into the room, her spine stiffened. Her words became clipped, careful. She smiled too much, the way people do when they're trying to keep the peace, and I copied her. There were moments, strange and fleeting, that still live in the corners of my memory like static, flashes that never fully resolve into clear pictures. A door creaking open at night, a hand brushing against my leg when I wasn't sure if I was dreaming, my nightgown feeling different in the morning than when I went to bed. I used to think these were just childish fears, bad dreams, but now I wonder if they were my mind's way of protecting me, wrapping truth in fog because it was too much to bear. I once asked my mother why Tio lived with us. I was 9. She was folding laundry, her hands moving quickly over a pile of towels that smelled like lavender and bleach. She didn't look at me when she answered. She just said, "He helps with things." I remember the way my stomach dropped. Even then, I knew she was lying. I didn't understand what the lie was about, but I could feel the weight of it, and I never asked again. Our house was a place of routines. Predictability meant safety. We ate at the same times every day. We prayed before every meal, and we never talked about the past. The photo of my so-called father was kept in a drawer, not on the wall like other families. There were no wedding pictures, no family albums, just a handful of carefully chosen images, staged and cold. Sometimes I wondered what other people's homes felt like. My best friend Amanda's house smelled like vanilla and always had music playing. Her parents argued sometimes, but it was loud and honest. And then they laughed afterward. There was life in that house. In mine, there was only survival. Quiet meals, locked doors, and a mother who kissed my forehead with shaking hands. I used to think that the way we lived was just our version of normal, that maybe some families didn't need to talk about everything, that maybe love could exist in silence. But it wasn't love. It was fear, disguised as faith, control, camouflaged as tradition. The first time I truly felt how small I had become was during a sleepover at Amanda's when I was 10. Her dad came home late from work, and as he walked in the door, she ran to hug him, jumped into his arms, and he laughed, held her, kissed the top of her head like it was the most natural thing in the world. I froze. My heart pounded. My skin crawled. I couldn't understand it. This ease, this closeness. I sat stiff on the couch, hands clenched in my lap. When Amanda turned and asked, "Is everything okay?" I just nodded and smiled, but my insides were screaming. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, trying to understand what was wrong with me. Why the idea of being held like that made me feel sick. Why I didn't miss Tio when he left. Why I sometimes wished he would never come back. And that thought, wishing someone who was supposed to love me would disappear, filled me with so much guilt that I cried silently until morning. Back home, I buried that feeling, like I buried everything else. I threw myself into school, into chores, into being the perfect daughter. If I could just keep everything in order, maybe the dread would go away. But it never did. It lived inside me, like a second skin. When I turned 12, something shifted. Tio began to notice me differently. His eyes lingered longer. His compliments felt heavier. He once told my mother, "She's growing up fast," while looking at me in a way that made my stomach twist. I started wearing oversized sweaters. I stopped dancing around the house. I avoided being alone in any room with him. My mother noticed. I could see it in the way she started closing her bedroom door at night, in the way she flinched when he brushed against me in the hallway. But she never said a word, and neither did I, because silence was our family's currency, and I was rich in it. There were moments when I would look at my mother and wonder who she was. Not the version she showed the world, the devout, polite woman who never missed a Sunday Mass, but the woman behind the closed doors, the one whose hands trembled when she lit candles, the one who would sometimes sit on the edge of her bed, staring at the floor, whispering prayers I didn't understand. I remember one afternoon, I came home from school early because I'd gotten sick. I opened the door quietly and heard her sobbing in the kitchen. She didn't know I was there. She was on the floor, clutching a dish towel, rocking back and forth. She kept saying, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry," over and over like a broken record. I backed away slowly and closed the door again. I waited outside for over an hour before walking in and pretending like I'd just arrived. She smiled at me, asked if I wanted soup, and I said yes, like always. Now, looking back, I think she wanted to tell me. I think she tried in the only way she knew how, through half sentences, through long stares, through the pain she could never put into words. But the truth was too big, too ugly. And maybe she thought she was protecting me. Maybe she thought silence would be safer. But the silence is what broke me. It's what kept me blind for so long. And I know I'm not the only one. So many of us were raised in homes where the truth was locked away, where abuse hid behind smiles and trauma was called tradition, where the people who were supposed to love us were the same ones who taught us how to disappear. If you're still reading this, if you've ever looked back at your childhood and felt that pit in your stomach, that sense that something was wrong, even if no one ever said it, please comment below. Even if it's just, "I felt that too." You'd be surprised how many of us are carrying these invisible scars. And sometimes, just seeing that someone else survived it, that someone else found the courage to speak, is enough to keep going. I haven't even told you what I found in that envelope yet. Silence had rules in my house. It had a rhythm, a pulse, a life of its own. And I learned to move with it like second nature. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't ask too many questions. You didn't talk about things that made the air in the room feel heavy. If something felt off, you pretended it didn't. If someone looked at you too long, too strangely, you looked away. And if pain ever showed up in your chest, like it often did in mine, you learned to bury it so deep that even you forgot where you put it. This wasn't survival the way people usually talk about it. It was quieter, more invisible. It was the slow kind of dying, where every part of you folds inward, one layer at a time. And the worst part? No one from the outside ever noticed. From the outside, we looked like a perfectly functioning little household. My mother, the sweet religious woman. Me, the quiet, obedient daughter. Him, the man who helped with things. We went to church every Sunday, smiled politely at neighbors, brought casseroles to funerals, paid bills on time. We never raised suspicion. Because monsters don't always live under beds. Sometimes they sit at your dinner table, asking you to pass the salt. When I got older, the world started to ask questions I didn't know how to answer. Friends would ask where my dad was, and I'd say, he died before I was born. The same way I'd say my name or my birthday, like it was just a fact. A sentence memorized so well that it no longer belonged to me. The lie didn't feel like a lie. It felt like survival. A script I'd been given before I was old enough to read. But deep down, there was always a pull, a discomfort, a restlessness, something inside me that didn't feel whole. I remember once in high school, we had to do a genealogy project, create a family tree. The teacher asked us to bring photos, interview relatives, gather stories. That night, I went home and sat at the kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper. My mother was washing dishes. I asked gently, "Do you have any pictures of Dad? Anything I could use for school?" Her hands froze in the water. I still remember the sound of the faucet running, uninterrupted, as she stood there staring at the wall. Then she turned around slowly, wiped her hands on a towel, and said, "That's not important. Make it about my side of the family." And just like that, the conversation was over. And I did what I always did. I obeyed. But I remember that night in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering, why? Why didn't I even know what his voice sounded like? Why had no one ever told me a single story about the man who made me? I told myself she was grieving, that it was just too painful, that it was easier to live in the present than to unearth the past. But even that excuse started to unravel as I got older. It's strange how trauma teaches you to erase yourself, how it convinces you that your questions are a burden, your curiosity a threat. I became so good at staying silent that I started to disappear. Not in the dramatic way. No drug problems, no running away, but emotionally, spiritually. I became someone who existed around other people's needs. I filled whatever role was needed. Helper, daughter, worker, listener. But I never asked for anything in return. Because asking meant exposure. And exposure meant danger. My mother reinforced that without ever saying it directly. She was the master of indirect messaging. Her disapproving glances, her tight smiles, her subtle changes in tone, they taught me more than words ever could. She never said, "Don't ask about your father," but I understood that I wasn't supposed to. She never said, "Don't be alone with him," but she always appeared in the doorway just long enough when I was. Always watching, always calculating, always afraid. Looking back, I don't think she meant to destroy me. I think she was destroyed long before I was born. I think she thought she was keeping me safe, but the truth is, she handed me over to the silence because it was the only language she had left, and I, her daughter, learned to speak it fluently. I remember one particular Sunday afternoon when I was about 15. We were sitting in church, and the priest was preaching about the weight of secrets, about how the truth will always rise no matter how long it's buried. My mother's hands clenched in her lap. I could see the whites of her knuckles, and I watched as tears silently slid down her cheeks. But she didn't move. She didn't wipe them. Just sat there, staring at the altar, crying in silence. I wanted to ask her what was wrong, but I didn't, because I already knew the answer. Everything. Sometimes I imagined what it would be like if she had told me the truth. I pictured her sitting me down, taking my hands in hers, saying, "Lucia, I need to tell you something. Something terrible. Something I've carried alone for too long." And in that version, I would have cried, yes, but I would have understood. I would have held her. We would have faced it together. But that moment never came, because fear is a powerful jailer, and she had built her cell too well. When I turned 18 and got accepted into a small community college in a nearby town, I thought I was free. I packed my bags with trembling hands, kissed her cheek, and left. But freedom isn't just a place, it's a mindset. And I hadn't left the silence behind. It had followed me. I still avoided talking about my past, still flinched when someone stood too close, still couldn't sleep with the door unlocked. I dropped out before the end of the first year, said it was money, said it was homesickness. But the truth? I didn't know who I was without the walls I grew up in. The outside world was too loud, too bright, too unpredictable. So I came back home, told myself it was temporary, that I was just helping while my mother recovered from a minor surgery. But months turned into years, and the silence welcomed me back like an old friend. After I returned, the routines resumed. We settled into the familiar rhythms. I cooked, she prayed. He visited occasionally. I stopped wondering where he went when he left, or what he did when he was gone. That kind of curiosity had been trained out of me. I became what my mother needed me to be, or maybe what she always feared I'd stop being. A daughter who asked nothing, needed nothing, questioned nothing. But I couldn't stay asleep forever. The older I got, the louder the quiet became. It echoed in every hallway, sat at the edge of every meal, haunted every glance. And then, of course, she got sick. Watching her die was a slow, excruciating process. Cancer eats not just the body, but the soul. And in those final weeks, she was barely conscious most of the time. But on one of her lucid days, she called me to her bedside. Her voice was a rasp, barely there, but her eyes were clear. She took my hand. It was bony, fragile. She whispered, "Lucia, if I go before I can tell you, find the letter. I left it with Father Miguel. He knows." At the time, I didn't understand. I thought maybe it was about bills, or property, or instructions for her funeral. But now, after the scene at the cemetery, after the priest refused to finish her burial, I knew it was something else, something far worse, something I had carried unknowingly my whole life. I don't think she ever wanted me to live in lies. I think she wanted to protect me from the truth because she didn't believe I could survive it. But the truth has a way of cracking through even the thickest walls. And once it does, you can never go back. The silence I had lived in for so long was beginning to collapse, brick by brick. And all I had left was the sound of my own heartbeat in the dark. If you're still here, reading this, and you've ever been trapped inside a silence that wasn't yours, if you've ever felt like your life was a story someone else wrote for you, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment, even if it's just, "I grew up quiet too," because I promise you, these stories matter. And sometimes, telling yours is how you finally find your voice. I didn't open the envelope the night I got it. I couldn't. It sat on the table in front of me like a living thing, like it had a heartbeat, like if I touched it, it might scream. I kept pacing around it, my feet bare against the cold tile floor of the kitchen, hands shaking slightly, a glass of water untouched on the counter. My mother's handwriting on the front was unmistakable, delicate, familiar, even elegant in its restraint. For Lucia, when the time is right. But what does right even mean when your entire life is unraveling? I remember standing there with the envelope in my hands, trying to breathe, trying to convince myself it was just a goodbye letter, just a list of things I needed to know about the house maybe, or maybe something sentimental, something soft. But deep down, in the pit of my stomach, I knew better, because no one stops a funeral for a goodbye letter. No priest looks you in the eyes and says the truth lives inside you, unless that truth is something so heavy it can break you. And part of me was already broken. The rest was just waiting. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there with that envelope between my fingers, watching the candles flicker, listening to the sounds of the house groaning in the dark. Every creak, every whistle of wind against the window, it all sounded like voices I couldn't understand, like memories scratching to be remembered. The next morning, I went outside just as the sun was rising. I took the envelope with me, clutching it to my chest, still unopened. The grass was wet, and the air was thick with that heavy Georgia humidity that sticks to your skin. I sat on the porch steps, the same ones I'd sat on as a little girl, eating popsicles, watching cars go by. Back then, the world felt big and full of wonder. Now it felt like a trap, like every part of it had been built to keep me from knowing who I really was. I stared at the envelope, my hands trembling, and then I opened it. The first thing I noticed was that it wasn't just one letter. It was a set of pages, all handwritten, some with shaky lines like she'd written them when her hands were failing her. The first line hit me like a punch to the chest. Lucia, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and it means you are ready for what I was too afraid to say out loud. My breath caught. I could already feel the walls of the world shifting around me. She wrote about her childhood first, how she had grown up in a strict household, how her parents believed in silence and appearances, how she had learned early that some truths were too ugly to ever speak aloud. She told me about her brother, my Tio, how he was older, stronger, how no one ever questioned him because he was a man in a house where men ruled everything, and how, one summer night when she was just 15, he came into her room and never left. She said it happened more than once, that every time she tried to tell someone, her own mother slapped her across the face and told her to keep her voice down, that he was family, and family doesn't ruin family. She wrote that she started locking her door at night, but he had a key, that the locks didn't matter, that no one ever came to help her, that silence became her only defense. And then she wrote the words that broke me. When I found out I was pregnant, I was told to keep it quiet, to pretend it was someone else, to say it was a boy from church, but I knew I couldn't do that. So I told everyone your father died in an accident, that he was good, that he was gone. And I tried, God, I tried to love you without letting you see the truth. My whole body froze. I could barely see the words through my tears. My heart was thudding in my chest like it was trying to escape. I read it again and again. Each time, the meaning hit harder. The man I had called Tio my entire life wasn't just a shadow. He was my biological father. My mother had been raped, over and over, by her own brother, and I was the result of that violence. The silence wasn't just about shame. It was about survival. I dropped the letter onto my lap and curled forward, arms around my knees, sobbing so hard I thought I might throw up. The grass was cold under my feet. The sun was rising higher, but the warmth couldn't touch me. I felt hollow, like I didn't belong to myself anymore. She continued the letter, trying to explain. You were never a mistake, Lucia. You were the only good thing that came from something so cruel. And I hated myself every day for not being strong enough to tell you, for letting him stay in our lives, for pretending he was an uncle when he was the reason I cried myself to sleep every night. But I was afraid. I didn't want you to carry that pain. I thought I could protect you from it by hiding it. But she didn't protect me. She handed me over to the man who had destroyed her. She let him be near me, alone with me, brush my hair, pat my back, take up space in my life without ever warning me what he had done. And the worst part was, now I couldn't even ask her why. I couldn't scream at her. I couldn't beg for more details. I couldn't say, how could you? Because she was gone, and all I had left were her words. I read the rest of the letter through blurry eyes. She apologized again and again, told me she had written it months ago, but hadn't been able to bring herself to give it to me. She said she asked Father Miguel to hold on to it, to give it to me only when the time was right, and she ended it with something that broke me all over again. I hope one day you can forgive me, not just for what I let happen, but for all the times I made you feel small, or scared, or unloved. I didn't know how to be a mother. I only knew how to survive. The paper slipped from my fingers. I sat there for a long time, numb, empty, alive, but shattered. That night, I didn't go back inside. I slept on the porch, curled into myself like a child. I didn't dream. I didn't cry. I just listened to the night sounds, the crickets, the wind, the distant bark of dogs, and wondered what part of me was still real. When I woke up the next morning, something was different. Not better, not clearer, just heavier. The truth had settled into my bones like winter. I moved slower, ate less, spoke to no one. But in the quiet of those days, I started to piece together the fragments. I started to let myself remember things I had forced myself to forget, like how he used to come into my room when I was small and sit on the edge of the bed. He never touched me, at least, not in the way I feared, but his presence always made my skin crawl, like I was being watched, judged, possessed. I remembered how he'd sometimes say, "You're just like your mother," and the way he said it made my blood turn cold, like it wasn't a compliment, like it was a threat. I started realizing that my trauma didn't need proof to be real, that the dread I had lived with, the fear, the silence, it was valid. It was truth, even if no one else ever saw it. There are no easy words for what it means to discover you were born of violence, that your life started with someone else's pain, that every memory you have is laced with something darker than you ever imagined. But if you're reading this, and you've ever had to confront a truth like that, something that shifts the ground beneath your feet, please share your story, even if it's just a sentence. Write in the comments, "I found my truth too," or "My silence had weight," because I promise, someone out there is carrying something similar, and your voice might be the one that helps them survive another day. The days after reading the letter felt like moving through water, slow, heavy, disoriented. I wasn't crying anymore, not in the way people imagine grief. I was quiet, still. There's a kind of mourning that happens when your past dies, not just the people in it. I wasn't just grieving my mother. I was grieving the story I had believed about myself for 38 years. Everything felt different. The house, the air, even the way the light poured through the kitchen window. That same kitchen where I used to sit and eat cereal while she hummed hymns now felt haunted, not just by her absence, but by everything unspoken that had lived between those walls. The silence wasn't comforting anymore. It was deafening. I tried to pretend for a while. I kept the house clean. I swept the porch. I walked to Cheryl's diner every morning like nothing had changed, but inside, I was unraveling. Every familiar face suddenly felt like a mask. I'd look at neighbors and wonder, did they know? Did they suspect? Had anyone ever questioned why Tio had lived with us all those years? Why I never had a father? Or had they just smiled politely and let the silence do its job, the way small towns often do? People would say, "Sorry about your mama," and I'd nod, smile, say thank you. I couldn't tell them that my mother's death had set fire to everything I thought was true. I couldn't explain that I was walking around with the weight of a revelation so heavy I felt like I might collapse. How do you even start that conversation? There's a strange thing that happens when your trauma finally has a name. You'd think it would bring relief, some form of closure, but it doesn't, not at first. It opens doors to rooms you didn't even know existed. It brings memories flooding in, uninvited, unfiltered, unforgiving. I started remembering things I had buried so deep I thought they were gone. Like the way Tio used to brush my hair with slow, deliberate strokes, never speaking, just watching me in the mirror. Or the way he lingered in doorways, his eyes scanning me with something that never felt right. I remembered the time I caught him in my room while I was at school, holding one of my dresses. When I asked what he was doing, he said he was fixing the window. The window wasn't broken. These moments, once chalked up to confusion or childhood imagination, now rang with clarity. My body had always known something was wrong. It had been trying to warn me for years. The tightness in my chest, the way I flinched at sudden movements, the dread I felt when left alone with him. My body had remembered what my mind had been forced to forget, and I was angry. Angry at him, of course. Angry at my mother for staying silent, but also angry at myself, for not knowing, for not seeing, for being a child who trusted the adults around her. That's the most twisted part of trauma. You end up blaming the child you once were for not saving herself. You end up hating your innocence, like it was a weakness instead of the theft it really was. There were nights I couldn't sleep. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling like I was outside my own body. I'd walk past mirrors and avoid looking too long, afraid of what I might see staring back. I didn't feel like a person. I felt like a shadow. I started talking to Father Miguel. I needed to understand why he had done what he did at the funeral, why he had stopped everything and pointed directly at me. I thought I hated him for that, for making it all so public. But when I sat across from him in the quiet of the rectory office, I saw it in his eyes. He had been holding that secret too. He looked older than I remembered, more tired. "I promised your mother I would only give you the letter if you asked," he said. "But when I saw you at the funeral, standing there so lost, I knew she wouldn't want me to stay silent anymore." I asked him if he knew. About Tio, about the truth. He nodded slowly. "Not everything, but enough." That shook me. That people knew. That they had known. That the adults around me, those who were supposed to protect, had instead turned their heads. Silence doesn't just live in families. It lives in entire communities. And when it does, it becomes a system of protection. For the abuser, never for the abused. The worst part? I didn't know what to do with all that knowing. What do you do when your identity is built on lies? How do you walk forward when every step feels like it's dragging 1,000 pounds of inherited pain? I tried therapy. A few sessions at the community health clinic. The woman was kind, gentle-voiced, but I found myself lying to her too, minimizing, laughing off things I should have cried about, because vulnerability was dangerous, because the truth was too raw, because part of me still didn't feel like I deserved to take up that much space. I started writing instead, pages and pages, letters to my mother I'd never send, memories I wasn't sure were real but needed to get out of my head. I wrote until my hand cramped, until the pen dug grooves into my fingers. And slowly, so slowly, I began to feel something shift. Not healing, not yet, but a spark, a flicker of something that said, "This is not where your story ends," because it couldn't be. I had survived too much, lost too much, been silent for too long. And one night, I opened my old laptop, the one I hadn't touched in months, and I did something I never imagined I'd do. I started recording myself, just audio at first. Me, talking into the void, rambling, crying, cursing, telling the truth, unfiltered and raw. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I just knew I had to say it out loud, to take the truth out of my body and give it shape. Eventually, I posted one of those recordings anonymously. Just a voice, just a story, just the truth. And something happened that I didn't expect. People listened. They commented. They shared. They wrote back with their own stories of abuse, of silence, of secrets that had lived too long in the dark. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel alone. Because that's the thing about telling the truth. It's terrifying, yes, but it's also liberation. It's taking the chains that were wrapped around you and melting them down into something that can't be used against you anymore. And if you've made it this far in my story, if you're still here, reading, breathing through the weight of it all, I want to ask you something. Have you ever carried a truth that didn't feel safe to say? Have you ever felt the weight of silence pressing against your chest like it was trying to suffocate you? If you have, please leave a comment. Write, "My truth matters," or "I'm breaking the silence," or even just, "I'm still here." Because your presence matters. And you never know who needs to see your words to find their own strength. Once I realized people were listening, really listening, something inside me cracked open. At first, it was just a few anonymous voices commenting beneath the audio clips. Simple things. "I see you. Thank you for saying it." I thought I was the only one. But those comments hit me harder than anything else had. Because they weren't just responses. They were lifelines. Proof that the pain I had carried wasn't invisible anymore. That my voice, the one I had been taught to suppress, could actually echo beyond the four walls that once held me prisoner. I started recording more. Still audio only, still faceless. I didn't have the courage yet to let the world see me. My face still felt like a mask, one I wasn't ready to take off. But my voice was waking up, and with every story I shared, I felt my own truth becoming less poisonous and more powerful. There was one story I almost didn't share. It had lived in a locked drawer in the back of my mind for years. A memory I had convinced myself wasn't real because it was too painful to believe. But now, with this strange new community of strangers who felt like more family than my own blood, I decided to try. I talked about the time I came home early from school when I was 13. It was raining hard, and I had a headache. I remember the smell of wet asphalt and the squeak of my sneakers as I walked in the back door. The house was unusually quiet. I called out, but no one answered. I walked toward the hallway, and that's when I heard it. His voice. Low, angry, clipped. And hers. My mother's. She was crying, pleading. I didn't understand the words at the time, but I remember how it felt. My whole body went cold. I crept closer. I shouldn't have, but I did. Through the crack of the door, I saw him pinning her against the wall. Not with fists. He never used fists, but with words, with presence, with that suffocating dominance I knew too well. He was accusing her of something, threatening her. I don't remember exactly what he said, but I remember the look in her eyes, frozen, like a bird too exhausted to fly anymore. I backed away before they saw me. I hid in the garage until it was dark. I never told anyone, until now. When I finished sharing that story into the microphone, I couldn't breathe. I felt like I'd ripped open a wound that hadn't even scarred yet. But I posted it anyway. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted someone to tell me I wasn't crazy. Maybe I just needed to finally say it aloud. That episode exploded. Hundreds of comments. Some from women, some from men, some from people who had never spoken their own stories out loud before, but suddenly felt brave enough to try. There was something holy about it, almost sacred, like we were building a temple out of our collective pain, not to worship it, but to name it, to hold it up to the light so it couldn't hide anymore. And that's when I realized something terrifying and liberating. If people had the courage to share their truths with me, then I had to keep going. I had to face the one thing I'd been avoiding since the funeral. Him. Tio. My biological father. The man whose existence had hovered over my life like a shadow I was too scared to name. I had no idea where he was. After the funeral, he hadn't come around. I didn't know if he had left town or if he was just lying low, waiting for the dust to settle. But I knew one thing. I couldn't keep healing without confronting the ghost who had haunted every room of my childhood. I found him 2 towns over. I got the address from a woman at the diner who used to know his cousin. I don't think she meant to give me that information. She was just rambling, not realizing how tightly I was listening. But the second I had that address, something inside me clicked. I had to go. I had to see him. I needed to look him in the eyes, not for revenge, not for answers, just to reclaim myself. I drove out there alone. No music, no distraction, just the sound of my heartbeat and the wheels on the pavement. The town was small, even smaller than mine. The kind of place where everyone's curtains twitch when a new car pulls into a driveway. His house was beige, peeling paint, front porch caving slightly on one side. A rusted lawn chair and an empty beer can sat like sentries. I sat in my car for a long time, watching the front door, willing myself to get out. My hands were sweating. My jaw was clenched so tight it ached. I kept hearing my mother's voice, "You don't have to do this," but I also heard my own voice, the one I was finally learning to trust. I walked up to the porch and knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Then the door opened. He looked older, smaller. His belly hung over his belt. His hair had thinned into wisps, but his eyes, those eyes were exactly the same, cold, sharp, empty. For a second, he didn't recognize me. Then something shifted in his face. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, his mouth curling into something like a smile. "Look what the cat dragged in." I didn't speak. I couldn't. He leaned against the doorframe like we were about to have a friendly chat. "What brings you here, girl?" he asked. Not Lucia, not daughter, just girl. I wanted to scream. I wanted to punch him. I wanted to crumble into dust. But instead, I looked him straight in the eyes and said, "You know why I'm here." And for a moment, just a moment, I saw something flicker behind his gaze. Not fear, not guilt, annoyance, like I was a mosquito buzzing too close. He sighed and said, "That was a long time ago," as if that erased anything, as if the years that followed, my life, my mother's pain, the silence, were just background noise to him. I said, "You hurt her. You hurt me." He didn't flinch. He just said, "We all got our demons." And that was it. That was all I needed to know. There would be no apology, no tearful confession, no moment of redemption. Because monsters don't change when you confront them. They don't shrink or beg. Sometimes they just stand there, hollow, reminding you why you left them in the dark for so long. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just turned and walked away. Because I finally understood that healing doesn't always come from justice. Sometimes it comes from knowing you survived, from looking the monster in the face and choosing not to let it live inside you anymore. That night, I recorded again. I told the story raw, no script, no edits. I told it like it happened, every breath, every stare, every broken part of me that stitched itself back together as I walked away from that porch. And I told the people listening what I needed to hear myself. You don't need their apology to heal. You don't need their permission to move on. You don't need their acknowledgement to reclaim your story. If you're reading this and you've ever had to face the person who broke you, if you've ever stood in front of the wreckage they left and still walked away, please comment below. Write, "I faced the silence," or "I'm choosing freedom." Because this story isn't just mine anymore. It's all of ours. And we're not whispering anymore. After that day on his porch, something shifted inside me. It wasn't like in the movies. There was no music swelling, no dramatic realization, no sudden freedom wrapping me in warm arms. It was colder than that, quieter. It was the kind of shift that only people who've survived long silences understand. A deep, slow unwinding of something that had been tangled inside me for so long, I didn't know where it ended or where I began. I drove home in silence, no music, no tears, just the rhythm of the road and the sound of my breath, steady and even, as if my body had finally remembered how to breathe without flinching. The sky was pale and gray, the kind of sky that presses down on you without quite raining. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting to see what I'd do next. And honestly, I didn't know. I sat in my car outside the house for what felt like hours, staring at the front door, staring at the porch swing, staring at the ghost of who I had been before I knew the truth. I didn't feel like that woman anymore. I didn't feel like the child who tiptoed through rooms trying not to make noise. I didn't feel like the daughter who held her mother's hand while she died, still not knowing the full weight of the secrets between them. I felt raw, exposed, but strangely, I also felt awake. The days that followed were a blur of quiet revelations. I found myself moving through the house like a stranger, touching the edges of furniture like I was searching for some kind of answer in the wood. I went through drawers, closets, boxes I hadn't touched in years, and in doing so, I found pieces of her, my mother, that I had never seen before. Photos I didn't recognize, letters I had never read, journals with shaky handwriting and pressed flowers tucked between the pages. It was like she had left breadcrumbs for me, scattered pieces of herself, hoping I'd find them one day when I was ready. And I was. I was ready to see her as more than the woman who raised me. I wanted to understand her as a whole person, as a survivor, as someone who made choices, terrible, painful, heartbreaking choices, not because she didn't love me, but because she was drowning in a world that never taught her how to swim. One night, I found a photo of her as a teenager. She was standing in a field of tall grass, laughing, her head tilted back, hair wild around her face. She looked free. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I recognized her, but because I didn't. I didn't know that version of her. I had only ever known the version crushed by silence, pressed into the shape of duty and fear. But here she was, alive, open, radiant. And for the first time, I mourned the girl she used to be, not just the mother I had lost. Grief is strange like that. It keeps evolving. Just when you think you've reached the end of it, it twists, reveals another layer. I cried for her that night, cried like I hadn't let myself cry in years. Not just because she was gone, but because I finally saw how much she had been forced to give up, how much of herself she had buried to keep me alive. I started writing again, not just recording. Pages and pages poured out of me. I wrote letters I'd never send, prayers I didn't know how to finish, memories that came in fragments like shattered glass. I wasn't trying to be poetic. I was just trying to make sense of the mess. To take all the pieces of my life and see if they could somehow form something whole. And somewhere in the middle of all that writing, I realized something that stopped me cold. I didn't hate her. I thought I would. I thought once I knew the full truth, once I understood the depth of her silence, I would be filled with rage. But what I felt was something else entirely, something messier, more painful. I missed her. I missed her so much it hurt to breathe. Because even though she didn't protect me the way I needed, even though she kept me in the dark, she loved me the only way she knew how. She fed me, held me, wiped my tears, sat beside me through every fever, prayed over me while I slept. That wasn't enough, I know, but it wasn't nothing. And that's the thing survivors don't talk about enough, the complexity of loving someone who hurt you, of missing someone who broke your heart in the quietest way possible. It's not black and white. It's not simple. It's a knot in your chest that never fully untangles. And some days you live around it. Other days it pulls you under. That's where I was, floating between forgiveness and fury. I recorded again. This time, I didn't hide my face. It wasn't planned. I just turned the camera on and spoke. My voice trembled at first. My hands shook, but I kept going. I told the story as it was. No dramatics, no filters, just the truth, raw and ugly and real. And the comments poured in. People from all over the world. Some who had never shared their pain before. Some who said they'd been waiting their whole lives to hear someone else say the words first. I read every comment, every message, every whispered piece of truth that someone dared to post in the dark hours of the night when silence feels the loudest. And one comment stayed with me more than any other. It said, "You are not your origin. You are your becoming." I read it over and over, because that's what I needed to hear, that I wasn't just the product of violence and silence. I was becoming something else, something more. I was reclaiming myself piece by piece. So if you're reading this now, if you've carried secrets in your bones, if you've ever looked at your past and felt shame instead of strength, I want you to say this with me. I am more than what they did to me. Type it, post it, shout it if you have to, because every time we say it, we take back a little more power, a little more breath, a little more life, and we remind ourselves, and each other, that healing isn't linear, but it is possible. One truth at a time. I drifted for weeks after that, like a ghost passing through rooms I no longer felt I belonged to. My body moved, but I didn't. I sat in front of the mirror most mornings, seeing a stranger in my reflection. Haunted eyes, cheeks hollowed by grief, lips that trembled when I spoke. I realized I was drowning in the past. I was now forced to remember, and each breath felt like a betrayal, because living meant carrying weight. The memories came in shards, sometimes unbidden. I saw him's silhouette in doorways, the way he leaned over me when I was small, his body a quiet threat even when he said nothing. I felt the pressure at my waist in the dark, hands I never asked for, breaths that weren't mine. My chest constricted just recalling the cold edge of dread, the way my throat would seize when he was near. I had hidden these sensations for decades, convinced they were trickery, a malfunction of memory, a child's overactive imagination. But now I knew they were real. They were scars, like white scars rising beneath the skin. One night, I woke gasping. The sheets stuck to my skin, my pillow soaked with tears. I had dreamed I was back in his house, 14 years old, clutching my school books, hearing my mother's voice screaming down the hallway. But when I ran, the hallway stretched endlessly, walls bleeding shadows. And then I saw him, at the end of the hall, waiting. So calm, so terrible. He only whispered one word, mine. And I woke, heart pounding, arms shaking, sweat slick on my skin. I didn't speak about it the next day. I got up, washed my face, went to the diner, and did my job. I smiled at regulars, refilled coffee, moved like I'd always done, like nothing had changed. But inside, I was unraveling again. The dream had torn open an old wound. Once, at Cheryl's, a regular, an elderly woman named Ruth, who always sat at the corner table, looked at me unusually long. She said, "You look tired, dear." I forced a smile and said I was fine. But those words, "you look tired," hit me harder than any accusation. because she saw me, not the mask, the broken parts. And in that moment, I realized the world is full of eyes that want to look away, but a few that see. It's a gift and a curse. I started having flashbacks again, things that felt trivial until now. A bruise on my thigh that I had blamed on tripping. The way my pajamas would be twisted in the morning, and I'd tell myself I must have rolled in my sleep. The way my mother would close her eyes whenever he entered the room, like she was silently begging him not to see. These memories, once so buried I thought they were gone, came flooding, and I couldn't push them away. Memory is a strange thing. It reshapes itself to survive. For years I believed there were no memories, but I see now they had been lying dormant, coding themselves into nightmares, into gut reactions, into silence. They always knew. My body always knew. I found myself avoiding mirrors now, avoiding rooms that felt too enclosed, avoiding floors creaking in ways that sounded like whispers. I turned music off when I slept. I slept with the lights on anyway. Sometimes I would walk in circles in the living room at 2 a.m., the walls pressing in, the silence mocking me. What do you do when your mind is your battleground? I journaled, pouring pain onto pages. I wrote confessions I had never said aloud. I wrote letters to her, the mother who tried, who failed, who loved imperfectly. I wrote words I couldn't yet speak to him, words full of fury, grief, demand. I wrote, I refuse to be silent again. I refuse to hide in my own life. I folded the pages and tucked them in boxes. I didn't burn them. I couldn't. They were still too raw. In those moments, I recognized something. Trauma wants to isolate you. It wants you to believe you're uniquely broken. But every comment on my recordings, every I see you message, was resistance. It was people pulling me back from the edge of isolation. It was proof that even in darkness, connection is possible. That our stories, no matter how awful, can become bridges instead of prisons. I began reaching out to survivors I had met online. One woman in a city halfway across the country sent me a message. When I read your words, I felt less alone. Another wrote, I'm finally telling someone. The words were simple, not flowery, not perfect, but they mattered. They were real. We formed a fragile web across silence, each of us threading truth into it. Then came the day I realized I needed to confront the physical spaces I'd always avoided. The porch where he used to sit, the hallway where I would sneak past his door, the room where I learned to shrink myself. I decided to return to the house, not to live, not to mourn, but to reclaim. Stepping across the threshold felt like crossing into another world. The air smelled stale, full of ghosts. The floorboards groaned under my weight. The walls that once held secrets now felt like they stood guard. I walked room by room, touching walls, drawing in their memory. I stood in my old bedroom, the one I had fled so often. I turned slowly, letting the silence speak. I let the old fear tumble through me until it lost its shape. I didn't cry, not initially. My eyes were dry, shocked. But something inside me hardened, something that said, you survived this place. You lived, you carried it, and now you stand here, still breathing. And then I opened the drawer of my old nightstand. Inside, I found something I didn't expect, a small, leather-bound diary. My mother's name embossed on the cover, her handwriting, her fear, her pain. I pulled it out and sat on the bed. The pages were brittle. His name appeared sometimes, her guilt, her longing, her promise. She had left it there, tucked away, waiting for me, waiting for the day I would have the courage to unlock it. I closed my eyes and let tears finally come, real ones. Because that diary was her voice, her hidden, broken voice. And in it, I heard her trying to say what she couldn't say to me. I'm sorry. I love you. I tried. It was brutal. It was necessary. When I left that house, I didn't look back. I carried the diary with me, clutched to my chest. I walked out like a woman dragged from a cage. The air outside felt wide, infinite, like I had stepped from night into morning. Back at home, I placed the diary next to the letter. I sat between them, the fragments I had inherited, the truths she left me, the lies I'd lived. I whispered into the darkness, I am here, I am allowed to exist. And for a moment, my heart didn't echo pain. It echoed presence. If you've ever been trapped in your body by memory, if you've ever felt like your past was routing every step you take, please comment below. Write, "I'm reclaiming my life," or "My scars speak." Because every time we name our pain, we weaken its hold. Every time we speak, we take back a piece of ourselves. After I placed the diary beside the letter, I just sat there in silence, staring at them like they were living things, like they might speak first. And in a way, they did. Not with words, but with weight. They were both so small, so fragile in my hands, and yet they held decades of everything I'd never been told, everything I was forced to feel without understanding. They felt heavier than truth. They felt like inheritance. And not the kind of inheritance anyone wants to carry. I don't remember falling asleep that night, but I remember waking up still in the chair, wrapped in the blanket from the couch. My neck ached. My legs were stiff. But the first thing I noticed was that my breathing was calm. Not shallow, not panicked, just slow, even, grounded. It was the first time in months that my body didn't feel like it was trying to run. In the following days, I became almost ritualistic. Each morning, I'd wake up early, make coffee, and sit with that diary in my lap like I was keeping vigil. I read it cover to cover more than once. I studied her handwriting, the places where the pen pressed deeper, like her hand shook while writing. Some entries were long, pages of confessions, heartbreak, rage. Others were only a line or two, but they gutted me just the same. One page simply said, "I don't know how to keep her safe without breaking everything." Another said, "God forgive me. I'm choosing silence again." Reading her pain didn't make mine disappear, but it did make it make sense. And sometimes that's what healing looks like. Not erasing the hurt, but understanding its shape, its source, so you can stop blaming yourself for it. So you can finally stop thinking it was your fault. Her pain was proof that she wasn't indifferent. She was drowning. And while I still wished with everything in me that she had done more, that she had run with me, screamed for help, burned it all down, I also knew deep down that she had tried in the only ways she knew how. Grief and rage often dance together. And that's exactly what I felt every time I turned a page. I would find myself crying for her, and then moments later, gripping the edge of the table with such fury I thought it might break beneath my hands. That push and pull of empathy and betrayal, it never really leaves you. You just learn how to carry both without letting either consume you. One entry shattered me more than the rest. It was dated just weeks before she died. In it she wrote, "She deserves to know. But I am afraid she will hate me. I am afraid she will never come back. But if I die with this secret, I fear she will never be free. Lord, please help her find the truth with grace. Help her forgive me." I remember whispering to the empty room, "I don't hate you." And it was true. I didn't. What I hated was what happened to both of us. The silence that wrapped around us like barbed wire. The way abuse doesn't just touch the victim. It poisons the soil, infects the bloodline, twists the love between mother and daughter into something unrecognizable. But here I was, sitting in the aftermath, still breathing, still standing. And for the first time, I started thinking about what it would mean to live, not just survive, not just endure, but actually live. Not around the trauma, not in spite of it, but with it, beside it, as something I carried, yes, but no longer something that dictated who I was allowed to be. That's when I started planning my departure from the town. I had spent too long in the shadows of small streets and smaller minds. Everyone knew, or at least they had their theories. And every glance held too much weight. Every visit to the grocery store felt like walking through a fog of rumors. I knew I couldn't heal fully while still living among the ghosts. So I sold the house. I gave away most of the furniture. I packed up my essentials, my recordings, my journals, the letter, the diary, and I left. No big farewell, no dramatic goodbye. Just a quiet slip into a new beginning. I moved 3 states away to a city where no one knew my name. I got a tiny apartment on the 3rd floor of a walk-up with creaky stairs and too much sunlight, and I filled it with plants I didn't know how to care for but wanted to try anyway. I started volunteering at a community center that supported survivors of abuse. At first, I just cleaned, filed papers, made coffee. But slowly I was invited into the room, invited into the circle, invited to speak. And when I told my story for the first time in that room, surrounded by women whose eyes held the same quiet pain I had carried for years, I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I spoke, steady, clear. And when I finished, someone across from me whispered, "Thank you for saying it first." That moment changed me, because I realized that my pain had become something more than weight. It had become language, a key, a light. And in sharing it, I wasn't just healing. I was helping others heal too. I began organizing storytelling nights, a safe space, a microphone, a dim room where truth could live. And every time someone stood up and shared their truth, I felt a little more whole, a little more alive, a little more free. I didn't hide anymore. I wore my story like armor, not to fight, but to stand. There were still bad days, triggers that came out of nowhere, smells, sounds, memories that made my breath catch. But I learned to ride those waves. I learned that healing isn't a straight line. It's a spiral. And just because you loop back into pain doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're moving, you're growing, you're alive. And I kept recording, not just for me, but for anyone who still needed permission to speak. If you've made it this far in my story, if you've sat with me through the silence, the unraveling, the remembering, I want to ask you something now, not as a content creator, but as someone who knows what it means to carry something too heavy for too long. Have you ever had to rebuild your life from ashes? Have you ever whispered the truth to yourself at night and wondered if it would ever be safe to say it out loud? If you have, please, leave a comment. Write, "I am rising," or "This is not my ending," or even, "I'm still standing." Because your voice matters here. Because every comment is not just engagement, it's evidence that we're breaking cycles, together. There's something sacred about the quiet moments after sharing a piece of your soul. The way the world feels suspended, like it's holding its breath with you, unsure whether to weep or to rejoice. That was how I felt after each of those storytelling nights at the center. When the last woman would step down from the mic, when the lights dimmed just a little more, and when the room was filled with nothing but the sound of steady breathing and hearts beating in unison. Those were the moments I felt closest to freedom, not because the pain was gone, but because I wasn't carrying it alone anymore. And it was in one of those quiet moments, sitting on the floor with a few other women, sipping cheap tea from mismatched mugs, that someone asked me a question I hadn't been ready for. What would you say to her? If she were still alive? The her was obvious, my mother, and I froze. Because up until that moment, I had only spoken about her. Never to her. Not really. Not in a way that demanded honesty from both of us. I had written letters I'd never send, screamed into pillows in her name, held her diary like a relic from another world. But I'd never imagined her here, in front of me, alive and waiting for an answer. The room fell silent, everyone waiting, but kindly. No pressure, just presence. I looked down at my hands, at the tiny scar on my wrist from when I was 8 and tripped while chasing after her in the garden. Funny how scars stay long after the moment has faded. I remembered the way she held my arm that day, how she whispered, "You'll be fine, baby. It's just a scratch." And now, all these years later, I whispered back. I'd ask her why. My voice was shaky, but I kept going. I'd ask her why she stayed, why she let it happen, why she didn't run the first time, why she didn't believe me sooner. I could feel the tears in my throat, hot and thick, and I'd ask her if she ever looked at me and felt guilty. My voice cracked. Because I did. For years. I carried her silence like a birthright. The others didn't say a word. They didn't need to. Their stillness was a shelter. But, I continued, I'd also tell her that I finally understand, that maybe love, when twisted by fear, doesn't look like love at all. That maybe she thought she was protecting me in the only way she knew. And I'd tell her I'm learning how to forgive, not to excuse, but to release. For both of us. The words hung in the air, and then someone reached out and touched my knee, grounding me. That night, I went home and lit a candle on the windowsill. Not for prayer, not for ceremony, just as a symbol, a light for her, A light for the girl I used to be. A light for every version of me that suffered in silence and survived anyway. I began recording again. Not just for the channel, not just for the audience, but for her. I recorded a message I knew she'd never hear, but I needed to say it. I called it The Conversation We Never Had, and I spoke like she was right in front of me. I told her about my first panic attack, about how I hated mirrors for a decade, how the smell of tobacco still made my stomach churn. I told her I hated her for not running, but loved her for surviving. I told her I'd stopped trying to make sense of it and started trying to live in spite of it. When I uploaded that video, I expected maybe a few messages, a handful of people who resonated. But what followed was unlike anything I'd experienced. Hundreds of comments, thousands of views. People from everywhere saying, "This was the conversation I never had with my mother." Or, "I said every word with you." Or, "I wish someone had told me this 10 years ago." That video, more than any other, became a bridge between mothers and daughters, between silence and truth, between the past and the present. It broke something open in all of us. And from that point on, I realized my healing wasn't personal anymore. It was collective. It was community. It was a movement of voices rising from shadows, refusing to stay silent 1 second longer. And something else shifted inside me, something I hadn't expected. I felt brave, not fearless, but brave. The kind of brave that means you still shake when you speak, but you speak anyway. The kind of brave that means you cry in the middle of a sentence and finish it anyway. The kind that says, "Yes, I was hurt, but I am not just what was done to me." So I began reaching out, not just to survivors, but to allies, therapists, advocates, people who had the tools and the language to support others. I built a small team, volunteers at first, who helped me structure the platform into something more than just videos. We added resources, emergency contacts, journal prompts, free audio meditations for nights when the silence got too loud. We created a private support group, moderated, safe, sacred, and it grew faster than I imagined. Each time someone posted in that group, they weren't just telling their story. They were reclaiming space, reclaiming voice, reclaiming identity. I would scroll through late at night, reading every word, cheering them on, holding their heartbreak in my chest like it was my own, because in many ways, it was. There was a woman named Tasha who messaged me privately one night. She wrote, "I watched your video in my car, couldn't go inside. My husband was waiting. I was scared. But after hearing you, I finally understood I'm not crazy. I'm not broken. I'm just hurt. And I can heal." That message broke me wide open. Because that's the point, isn't it? To remind each other that hurt is not identity, that pain is not personality, that trauma is not destiny. It's part of the path, but not the whole journey. And so, every night before bed, I'd whisper one sentence to myself, like a lullaby, a promise. I am more than what was done to me. Say it with me if you're reading this. Say it out loud. Whisper it. Type it in the comments. I am more than what was done to me. Or if you're not ready to say it yet, just type, still healing. Because there's no timeline on truth. There's only forward, together. Time has a way of softening the edges of grief, not erasing it, not replacing it, but shaping it into something you can hold without breaking. It's strange looking back now. If you had told me years ago that I'd be here, alive, whole, even hopeful, I would have laughed, or cried, or maybe both. But here I am. And if you're still here too, still watching, still breathing alongside me through this screen, then maybe, just maybe, something inside you is shifting too. I don't have all the answers. I still wake up on some mornings and feel the weight of old memories before my feet even touch the floor. I still flinch at certain sounds, certain smells, certain shadows. Healing isn't a straight road. It's a spiral, a loop, a labyrinth with no clear exit. But with each step, I've found pieces of myself I thought were lost forever. Laughter that feels real again. Touch that doesn't burn. Stillness that doesn't feel like punishment. And I want you to know, if you're still here, if you made it to the very end of this story, you are proof that survival is powerful, that pain doesn't have the last word, that telling your story, even if your voice shakes, is a kind of revolution. To the people who saw me when I couldn't see myself, thank you. To the ones who sent messages, shared your own truths, sat in silence with my pain so I wouldn't carry it alone, thank you. To you, watching this right now, holding your own invisible story in your chest, thank you. Your presence means everything, because this isn't just my story. It's yours too. It's ours. It belongs to every woman who was told to stay quiet, every child who was never believed, every survivor who walked through fire and still found a way to whisper, I'm here. Before I go, I want to ask you to take one small, brave step with me right now. If this story touched your heart, if you felt seen, heard, understood, if even for one moment you thought, that sounds like me, or I needed to hear this, please do 3 simple things that help this community grow stronger. First, hit that like button. It might seem small, but it tells the platform this story matters, that voices like ours deserve to be heard. Second, subscribe to the channel, not just for me, but for you, because this space we're building, it's sacred, it's safe, and it's not stopping here. There's another story waiting, one that might hold a mirror up to your own pain and offer a light where darkness once lived. Third, drop a comment below. And if you're not sure what to say, let me make it easy for you. Write, I survived, I'm still healing. Those words matter. They become part of our wall of strength. They let someone else, someone who's still afraid to speak, know they're not alone. Your voice, even in text, is a light for someone still in the shadows. And one more thing. If you're ready for the next chapter, if you want to keep walking this road with me through truth, pain, and healing, then don't leave just yet. Right here on your screen, there's another video waiting for you. It's a story just as raw, just as real, just as necessary. Click on it. Don't hesitate. Let's keep going, together. Thank you for being here, for staying, for feeling, for surviving. You are not alone, and I'll see you in the next story.